The morning mist clung to the air as the team of archaeologists stood at the edge of the dense forest, the ancient European woods looming over them like a dark, forgotten secret. They had traveled far, descending into the quiet heart of a remote village where no one dared venture into the depths of the forest. The locals spoke of legends, of an old burial ground lost to time, hidden beneath layers of earth and roots, untouched by human hands for centuries. Dr. Adrian Wells, the lead archaeologist, stood at the entrance to the excavation site, squinting at the map in his hands. He had studied the old legends and myths for years, always with a quiet sense of doubt, but the discovery of the lost tomb was different. This was real. His excitement barely masked the creeping sense of unease that had settled in his chest since they arrived. "We're here," Adrian muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. Behind him, the team gathered: Helen, the linguist whose knowledge of ancient scripts was invaluable; Mark, the geologist, always skeptical but ever practical; and Eva, the historian who had spent the last decade deciphering forgotten cultures and rituals. Together they were a formidable team, driven by the thirst for knowledge and the hunger for discovery. As they began to clear the earth from the site, the sun's pale light filtered through the trees, casting long eerie shadows across the ground. The first sign of the tomb came after hours of digging: a stone slab, weathered by time but unmistakably carved with intricate symbols, its surface blanketed in dirt and moss. "What do you make of this?" Helen asked, crouching down beside the stone. Her fingers traced the markings, which were unlike anything she had ever seen before. "It's not from any known civilization in this area," Adrian replied, a frown knitting his brow. "But these symbols, they're ancient, predating even the earliest records we have." They worked through the night, uncovering the stone coffin, its surface adorned with the same bizarre symbols. It was a heavy, imposing structure, like something from a forgotten age. Their excitement grew with each passing moment, and soon, with a final collective heave, the lid was removed. But what they found inside was not what they expected. Instead of a decayed corpse, a large, polished mirror rested within the coffin, its surface gleaming darkly in the dim light. The glass was framed in stone, with symbols running along its edges, ancient, unsettling markings that seemed to shimmer faintly as if alive. Eva's hand trembled as she reached forward to touch the mirror's surface. "This is not what I imagined." "What is it?" Mark asked, stepping closer, his voice tinged with skepticism. Helen leaned in, her eyes narrowing as she read the faint script etched along the frame. "It's a curse, a warning." "A mirror?" Adrian's voice was incredulous. "A mirror buried for centuries?" His gaze flickered to the reflections of his team in the dark glass, but the images did not match their reality. Instead, the reflections appeared wrong. Twisted, like grotesque versions of themselves, distorted faces with hollow eyes and twisted grins. It was as if the mirror showed something deeper, something darker. "Don't look into it," Helen warned, but it was too late. One by one, the team members found themselves drawn to the mirror, each of them stealing a glance, unable to resist the pull. As they did, the reflections seemed to distort further. The faces they saw were not their own, but exaggerated and monstrous, eyes wide with terror, skin unnaturally pale, mouths twisted into silent screams. Their worst fears and darkest thoughts were reflected back at them. And then, just as quickly as the vision had appeared, it vanished. But it left something behind, an unsettling feeling that clung to their skin like cold sweat. "Something's wrong," Mark muttered, stepping back. This isn't just a mirror." The air seemed heavier now, thick with an oppressive force. It was as if the very earth beneath them was holding its breath. Adrian's heart raced as he took a step back from the mirror. "What did we just uncover?" Helen's eyes were wide, fear slowly creeping into her voice. "We've disturbed something ancient, and it's not just a reflection. It's a doorway." "A doorway?" Eva whispered, her gaze fixed on the mirror. The shadows in the glass seemed to shift again, as though something behind the surface was moving. Something that shouldn't be there. They backed away from the coffin, the mirror now standing between them and the world beyond. And as the first of the team members, Eva, turned to leave the tomb, the reflection in the mirror grinned. The tomb had been waiting for them, its curse already taking hold. And so the nightmare began. The coldness of the tomb pressed against their skin, the air thick with an unsettling chill that seemed to seep into their bones. The forest outside had grown eerily silent, as if it, too, was holding its breath, waiting for something to unfold. No birds called, no wind stirred the leaves. Only the slow, rhythmic sound of their breathing broke the stillness. Adrian Wells stood motionless, his eyes locked on the mirror, the reflection still haunting the surface. His pulse quickened as the faint whisper of his own name echoed through his mind, too faint to be real, too persistent to be ignored. It was coming from the mirror. "Are you all right?" Helen's voice broke through the fog of his thoughts. He tore his gaze from the mirror, realizing that he had been staring at it for far longer than he intended. The chill that had crept into his body was no longer just from the air, it was something deeper, something crawling beneath his skin. He looked at his team. They too seemed frozen, unnerved by the mirror's presence. "We need to leave," Adrian said, his voice hoarse. The words felt too weak, too small for the enormity of what they were facing. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew it was already too late. "Just give me a moment," Helen said, moving forward despite the unease that gripped them all. She leaned over the coffin once more, running her fingers along the carvings, trying to decipher something, anything, that could explain what they had uncovered. The symbols, like ancient vines, seemed to pulse and twist before her eyes, defying logic and reason. "What's wrong with you, Helen?" Mark's voice cracked as he took a step back. His face was pale, his eyes darting nervously to the mirror and then away. "We shouldn't be here. We shouldn't have touched it." But it was too late. The mirror's pull was undeniable, drawing them closer, coaxing them with its silent promise of dark knowledge. And even as they debated their next move, something stirred in the silence. A subtle shift, like the very air was warping around them. Eva was the first to speak. "Do you feel it?" Her voice trembled, low and distant, as though she were speaking from some far-off place. Her eyes, wide with terror, were fixed on the mirror once more. "It's not just a mirror," she continued, her tone strangely detached. "It's feeding on us, on our fear, our regret, our darkest secrets." Adrian frowned, but before he could speak, Mark snapped, "Enough, Eva. This isn't some cursed object out of a folklore tale. It's just a damn mirror." But even as he said the words, he looked over at the mirror again, and that's when it happened. A sudden sharp crack. Like the sound of glass splintering. Adrian whipped his head around, his heart leaping in his chest. The mirror, which had once gleamed with a dull, unearthly light, now shimmered. It seemed to pulse with something darker, something that didn't belong in this world. And as the crack echoed through the tomb, the reflection began to shift. The grotesque versions of themselves slowly moved, as if alive, as if watching them. "Get away from it!" Adrian shouted, his voice hoarse with fear. But it was too late. The mirror's grip was already tightening around them. The distortion grew worse. Their reflections were no longer just ugly versions of themselves. Now their faces twisted and contorted, stretching unnaturally, as if something behind them was pulling the strings. The figures in the mirror began to move, slowly, deliberately. One by one they stepped forward, each movement mirroring the archaeologists in real time. But there was something wrong. Something horrifically wrong. As the reflection of Helen moved, she gasped and stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth. The figure of herself in the mirror was smiling. No, grinning, a smile too wide, too unnatural, stretching across her face. Her eyes were hollow, her teeth sharp and jagged. It was not Helen. It was a monster, a grotesque mockery of her. "No!" Helen screamed, her voice breaking. "That's not me." Adrian felt the chill in his own spine as he looked into the mirror. He saw his reflection staring back at him, his own face twisted in silent agony, the eyes of his reflection blackened with something darker than despair. His mouth opened, but no sound came out, only a horrible, silent scream that seemed to echo from deep within the mirror. The reflection of Mark moved next, his face now slack, his features melting into something that resembled a broken mask. He looked up at his reflection with wide, horrified eyes, but the figure in the mirror didn't look at him. It stared past him into the very soul of the room as if it knew what was to come. Eva was already backing away, her breaths coming in short, sharp gasps. "Oh God, it's taking us," she whispered. "It's already taking us." The ground beneath them seemed to shift, as though the tomb was alive, the very earth reacting to the presence of the cursed object. The walls of the tomb seemed to close in on them, suffocating them with the weight of centuries of darkness. "Leave!" Adrian cried out, but it was useless. None of them could move. They were trapped. Trapped in the mirror's web. Suddenly, the figure in Adrian's reflection moved, not just its eyes but its whole body. It leaned forward, pressing its palm against the glass as if reaching for him. His breath hitched in his chest as the reflection's eyes, black as pitch, locked with his. In that moment he felt it. The tug. The pull. As if something deep inside the mirror was yanking at his very soul, dragging it into its depths. He could feel his essence slipping away like sand through his fingers, and it terrified him more than anything he had ever felt in his life. He reached out to the others, but they were too far away. The mirror's grip on them was tightening. They too were beginning to succumb to the pull. One by one they were losing themselves to the reflections. And in the corners of the mirror, dark shapes began to move, shadows of what they might become. "Adrian?" Helen cried, her voice a rasping whisper. Don't look at it." But it was too late. Adrian's eyes were locked on the reflection now, on the dark thing standing in the mirror. It smiled at him, its mouth stretching unnaturally wide. With a final, desperate effort, Adrian turned his back on the mirror and stumbled towards the tomb's exit. But the shadows in the mirror followed him. And with each step he took, he could feel the cold fingers of the mirror reaching out, touching him, pulling him closer. The forest outside no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a trap. And the curse of the mirror had only just begun. The tomb's entrance loomed before them like a gaping mouth, dark and cavernous, beckoning them into the suffocating silence of the forest. The air was still, heavy with the scent of damp earth and the faintest trace of decay. Adrian's pulse thudded in his ears as he stumbled forward, desperate to escape the relentless pull of the mirror behind him. He could still feel it, tugging at his very soul, the chilling, invisible force that had settled in the pit of his stomach. But the outside world offered no relief. The forest was too quiet, too unnatural. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting strange, fractured shadows that seemed to move of their own accord, dancing with a rhythm that was not of this world. Behind him, he heard Helen's frantic footsteps, followed by the others. They too were fleeing from the tomb, from the mirror, but it was clear they weren't free yet. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with fear, each step they took accompanied by the sound of their breathing, short, sharp, and panicked. "Adrian?" Helen gasped, her voice trembling. "Where are we going? We need to get out of here now." He turned, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "I know. But it's not just the tomb. It's everywhere. The mirror, it's not finished with us. It's already inside our heads." Eva, still trailing behind, looked back toward the tomb, her face drawn with horror. "I can still hear it. It's whispering my name. In my head. It's calling to me." Mark said nothing. He was too far gone, his face blank, his eyes vacant, as though something vital had already slipped away from him. Adrian felt a surge of panic grip his chest, a desperate need to reach out and shake him back to reality, but he knew it was useless. Mark was already lost to the mirror's curse. "We need to find shelter," Adrian said, his voice hoarse, though he knew deep down that no shelter would protect them. The forest was alive, its very nature infected by the curse they had unleashed. They had only walked for a few minutes when they reached an old, dilapidated cottage hidden among the trees. Its stone walls were crumbled, its roof sagging with age, but it seemed like the only place they could rest. It wasn't much, but it was a place to hide from the horrors they had uncovered in the tomb. As they entered the cottage, a thick sense of dread enveloped them. The air was stale, musty with the scent of rot and dust. The floorboards creaked beneath their feet, and a cold draft seeped through the cracks in the walls. Despite its desolation, the cottage felt oddly familiar, as if it had been waiting for them. "We can't stay here long," Helen said, pulling her coat tightly around herself. Her voice was shaky, but there was an edge of determination in it now. "Whatever is happening, it's not over. We need to find a way to destroy the mirror." Eva nodded, her hands trembling as she clenched them at her sides. "But how? We have no idea what it is or where it came from." Adrian ran a hand through his hair, trying to clear his mind. The mirror, that cursed mirror, it had been waiting for them. But why? What was its purpose? And more importantly, how could they escape its grip? "We'll figure it out," Adrian said, though he wasn't sure he believed his own words. "But first we need to stay together. We can't let it isolate us. We can't let it get inside our heads." Mark had not spoken for some time, but now he muttered something under his breath, almost as if in a trance. "It's not just the mirror. It's here. It's everywhere." Adrian turned to him, his heart sinking. Mark's eyes were glazed over, unfocused. "What are you talking about?" he asked urgently. Mark's lips twitched, forming a twisted smile. "It's not a mirror. It's a doorway. It's not just reflecting us. It's pulling us into something else. Something that's waiting for us on the other side." Helen's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean? What is waiting for us?" Mark didn't answer. Instead, he tilted his head, his eyes darting around the room as though searching for something. His hands trembled violently as he grabbed at the edges of his shirt, pulling it taut as if trying to keep something inside. Then, with a sharp, desperate movement, he ran to the cottage door and flung it open. The night air rushed in, cold and biting, carrying with it the faintest whisper of the mirror's voice. The trees outside seemed to writhe, their shadows stretching unnaturally as they reached toward the cottage. "No!" Adrian shouted, rushing after Mark, but before he could stop him, Mark was already gone, swallowed by the darkness of the forest. "Mark!" Eva cried, her voice cracking as she stepped toward the door. But Adrian pulled her back. "It's too late," he whispered, the cold weight of despair settling over him. "The mirror, it's already taken him." Suddenly, a shrill cry split the night. It was Mark. His voice, distorted and guttural, echoed through the trees, as if coming from deep beneath the earth. The sound reverberated, growing louder, more frantic, as though Mark was calling out for them, or perhaps for something else. "He's gone," Helen whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of Mark's cries. "We have to leave. Now." But even as she said the words, Adrian felt something shift within him. The same tug, the same pull that had taken hold of them in the tomb. It was reaching out once again like the fingers of the abyss, dragging them back to the mirror. "We can't outrun it," Adrian said, his voice low, almost resigned. "It's inside of us now. It's always been inside." The darkness outside pressed against them, pushing in from all sides. The whispers were growing louder, more insistent, until it felt like the very walls of the cottage were closing in, the air thick with the stench of decay. Adrian turned, his eyes falling on the shattered mirror they had left behind in the tomb. He felt, that it was not finished with them. The mirror was just the beginning. The doorway it had opened was wider now, more insidious, and they were trapped within its reach. And somewhere, beyond the veil of reality, Mark's tortured screams continued to echo, a warning they were too late to heed. In the growing darkness, they could no longer tell if they were still in the world they had once known, or if they had already crossed over into the nightmare. The night stretched on, suffocating and endless, as if the hours themselves had become victims of the curse that had already begun to unravel the very fabric of their existence. Adrian sat by the dying fire in the cottage, his face pale, eyes sunken from the weight of what they had witnessed, and what they still had yet to face. The mirror was no longer just an object. It had become a malevolent force, an unrelenting tide that pulled at their minds, their souls, until it was the only thing they could see or think about. Helen was pacing, her movements erratic, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Eva sat quietly, her eyes hollow, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, as though she were trying to hold herself together, but the cracks were starting to show. None of them had spoken since Mark's screams had echoed through the woods and faded into the suffocating silence. The forest outside felt alive with something unseen, something that watched them from the shadows. "We can't stay here," Helen said suddenly, her voice sharp, breaking the oppressive silence. "It's getting closer. I can feel it like a presence creeping in." Adrian didn't answer immediately. He couldn't. His thoughts were clouded with the image of Mark's eyes, his eyes twisted and dark, a mirror image of himself, staring back at him with silent terror. That distorted reflection was all he could see when he closed his eyes, all he could hear in the silence. A hollow, broken version of Mark calling out to them, from somewhere deep within the abyss that had opened with the mirror. But Helen was right. They couldn't stay here. Not when the mirror had already claimed one of them. Not when the pull was so strong, so overwhelming. There was no escape unless they confronted what they had unleashed. "We have to go back," Adrian said quietly, his voice hoarse. "We need to find the tomb. We need to destroy the mirror." "Are you out of your mind?" Helen snapped, her voice sharp with panic. "You saw what happened to Mark. The mirror is alive. It's not just an object. It's a doorway to something else, something worse." "I know," Adrian whispered, his mind racing. "But if we don't go back, it's going to consume us. We've already seen what it can do. We've already seen what it wants." There was a moment of silence, thick and suffocating, as the weight of his words hung in the air. The fire crackled weakly in the hearth, casting flickering shadows that danced across the walls like ghosts, twisting and contorting in the dim light. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind, felt like a whisper, like the voice of the mirror itself. "We can't just sit here," Eva said, her voice barely audible, but there was a quiet desperation in it that made Adrian turn to look at her. "We have to stop it. We can't let it take the rest of us." Adrian nodded grimly, his resolve hardening. "We'll go back to the tomb. But we need to be careful. The mirror it's not just reflecting us. It's changing us." He stood up and moved toward the door, the cold air of the forest immediately seeping in, biting at his skin. But as he reached for the door handle, a sound stopped him. A whisper, faint and distant but unmistakable. "Adrian." The voice was a distorted version of his own, like an echo in a cavern. It reverberated through his mind, a pulse that seemed to come from the very ground beneath his feet. He froze, his hand hovering over the door. It was the mirror. It was calling him. He could feel its presence, its dark pull reaching out from the very heart of the tomb. And somehow he knew with a sickening certainty, that if he didn't go back, if he didn't confront it now, it would find him anyway. It would find all of them. He turned back to Helen and Eva, his face drawn with the weight of the decision. "We have to do this. We have no choice." Without another word, he opened the door and stepped into the night, followed by the others. The forest seemed even darker now, as though the very air had thickened, suffused with an unnatural tension. The trees were blackened silhouettes against the sky, their branches twisting like gnarled fingers reaching toward them. The path they had taken earlier was gone, swallowed by the darkness, and all that remained was the oppressive silence. The world felt wrong. The shadows were moving. Adrian felt the pull again, this time stronger, more insistent. It was coming from the tomb, that cursed place that had once been sealed, now open and waiting for them. As they walked, the air grew colder. His breath misted in front of him, and with each step, it felt like the ground itself was shifting beneath them. The trees seemed to move, their trunks bending, their roots creeping along the earth like serpents. Every rustle of leaves felt like a whisper, like a secret being shared between the trees, a secret they were not meant to know. "I can't do this," Eva said suddenly, her voice trembling. I don't want to go back there. It's too wrong." Adrian stopped and turned to her. Her face was pale, drawn with fear, her eyes wide, unfocused. "Eva, listen to me," he said urgently. "We don't have a choice. If we don't stop this now, it will take us. All of us." Helen stepped forward, her hand gently resting on Eva's shoulder. "We're in this together. We can't let fear control us now." But Eva shook her head violently, her hands pressed to her temples as though she could stop the whispers in her mind. "It's not just fear, it's inside me. It's inside all of us." Before Adrian could respond, a sharp, deafening crack split the air. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. And then the distant sound of Mark's voice, distorted, wailing, filled the night. It was louder now, closer. Adrian's heart pounded in his chest as he grabbed Eva's arm. "We have to hurry." They ran, fear pushing them faster, but the path seemed to stretch endlessly ahead. The trees were closing in, their branches twisting into shapes that seemed to mock their desperation. The tomb was near, but it felt like an eternity away. Finally they reached it. The ancient stone structure loomed before them, its entrance dark and foreboding, like the open mouth of some terrible beast waiting to swallow them whole. The faint glow from inside flickered, casting long eerie shadows across the ground. "We're too late," Eva whispered, her voice barely audible as she looked toward the entrance. Adrian's gaze locked on the tomb. He could see it now, the mirror, a sliver of light in the darkness, its surface gleaming with an unnatural sheen. It was calling to them again, beckoning them to step closer. And somewhere in that void, beyond the mirror, Mark's tormented cries echoed once more. They were too far gone. Too deep. But there was no turning back now. Adrian took a step forward, his heart pounding, knowing that whatever waited inside that tomb would change them forever. Whether they survived or not was no longer the question. The question now was whether they could escape the mirror's abyss, or if they would become part of its eternal darkness. And then the whisper came again, louder this time, like a command. "Step inside." Adrian's body froze. It was waiting. The air inside the tomb was thick with the scent of damp stone and age-old decay. The entrance seemed to pulse, its darkness stretching into an endless void. As Adrian stepped forward, the heavy weight of dread settled over him like a suffocating blanket. His breath caught in his throat, the chill of the place seeping into his bones. Behind him, Eva's footsteps faltered. He could feel her fear like a tangible presence, heavy and suffocating. Helen was close behind, her hand on Adrian's shoulder, her grip tight, as though she feared he might disappear into the shadows at any moment. "We should turn back," Eva whispered, her voice barely audible in the oppressive silence. Adrian didn't answer. He couldn't. The mirror was waiting for them, waiting to claim whatever piece of them remained unbroken. There was no turning back now. Not after Mark's cries had pierced the night. The forest had fallen silent, the air too still, too thick with something they could not name. The world outside had ceased to matter. The mirror was the only thing that existed. He moved forward, each step reverberating through the tomb's hollow chambers. The walls were lined with ancient symbols that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them, as though they were alive, watching him, waiting for him to make the wrong move. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the air became. It felt as though the tomb itself was alive, breathing, shifting with every step they took. A low hum vibrated through the ground beneath their feet, a sound like distant chanting, like voices from the other side. "We're close," Adrian said, his voice hoarse as he struggled to steady his nerves. "We have to get to the mirror." But Eva stopped, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. "I can hear it," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I can hear it, inside me." Adrian turned to her, his heart sinking. "Eva, no. Don't listen to it. The mirror wants to get inside your head. You have to fight it." But her gaze was distant, her eyes clouded, as though something was already pulling her away from him. Her lips trembled as she muttered something under her breath, something Adrian couldn't quite catch. And then, without warning, she took a step back, her foot catching on the uneven ground. "Eva!" Helen cried, reaching for her, but it was too late. Eva stumbled, her body jerking as though gripped by some unseen force. A guttural, inhuman sound escaped her throat, and before Adrian could move, she was gone, swallowed by the darkness. The sound of her screams echoed through the tomb, a high-pitched wail that sounded both human and not, as though something far worse had taken her place. Adrian felt his stomach turn, the weight of failure pressing down on him. He had failed. They had all failed. One by one, the mirror was taking them, twisting them into something else. "Adrian, we have to go now." Helen's voice broke through his panic, pulling him back to the present. He turned to her, her face pale with fear, but her eyes burning with determination. But even as she spoke, Adrian knew there was no escape. The mirror was already inside them, digging its claws into their very souls. No matter where they went, no matter how far they ran, they would never be free. But they couldn't just stand here, waiting to be consumed. The mirror had to be destroyed. Adrian nodded, trying to shake off the panic clawing at his chest. They moved deeper into the tomb, the air growing colder with each step. The walls seemed to close in on them, the passage narrowing until they found themselves in a small chamber, the center of which was occupied by a stone pedestal. And on that pedestal, bathed in an eerie glow, sat the mirror. It was a dark, angular thing, its surface cracked and scarred, but still impossibly smooth. The edges shimmered with an unnatural light, a faint silver glow that seemed to beckon them closer. It was as though the mirror itself was alive, pulsating with dark energy, waiting for them to come closer, to look into its depths. "No," Adrian whispered, his voice hoarse. "We can't look into it. If we do, it's over." Helen's hand reached out, but Adrian grabbed her wrist, stopping her. She looked at him, confusion and terror in her eyes. But he knew that once they looked into it, once they allowed it to show them their distorted reflections, they would lose themselves forever. "We have to destroy it," he said, his voice trembling. "We have to break it." But even as the words left his mouth, he felt it, the pull. It was subtle at first, like a tug at the back of his mind, but soon it was undeniable. The mirror was calling to him, promising to show him the truth, to show him what he had been running from. It whispered his name, low and insistent. Adrian felt the ground beneath his feet shift, the chamber tilting slightly as though the tomb itself was alive. The air thickened, pressing down on them, and the whispers grew louder, filling his mind with images, visions, twisted, distorted versions of himself and the others. He saw Mark's face, pale and stretched, his mouth open in a silent scream, his eyes wide with terror. He saw Eva, her body twitching unnaturally, her eyes vacant, like a puppet being controlled by an unseen hand. He saw himself, his reflection in the mirror, but it was wrong, so wrong. His face was twisted in agony, his eyes black, empty sockets staring back at him. The whisper grew louder, more insistent. "Look at it, Adrian. See what you've become." Helen's hand slipped from his wrist, and before he could stop her, she was moving toward the mirror, her eyes wide with terror and fascination. Her steps were slow, measured, as though the mirror had taken control of her. "Helen, no!" Adrian screamed, but his voice was drowned out by the roar of the whispers, the relentless pull of the mirror. He couldn't reach her, couldn't stop her. She reached the mirror, her hands trembling as she reached out to touch it. And then, the moment her fingers brushed the surface, a blinding light exploded from the mirror, filling the chamber with an otherworldly glow. Adrian shielded his eyes, but it was useless. The light surged, wrapping around him like a wave, pulling him into the abyss, dragging him toward the mirror. He could feel the coldness of it, the crushing weight of something ancient, something hungry. And then everything went black. The next moment, Adrian found himself standing in a dark, endless void, alone. The silence was suffocating, pressing in on him from all sides. His heart pounded in his chest and he could feel the presence of something, moving just out of sight, watching him, waiting. And then a voice, his own voice, echoed through the void, low and mocking. "Welcome to the other side, Adrian." The chill of realization gripped him, and for the first time he truly understood. There was no escaping the mirror. It had already claimed them. The darkness pressed in from all sides, suffocating, cold, relentless. Adrian stood, frozen in the void, his mind swirling in confusion and terror. He had thought he could escape, thought he could destroy the mirror, but now it seemed he was part of it. A reflection within a reflection, lost to the abyss that had consumed them all. Helen, Eva, Mark, they were gone. Or were they? Were they still out there, trapped in the same nightmare, their souls bound to the mirror, forever lost? Adrian's mind raced, his chest tightening with the weight of his failure. He had made a choice, to confront the mirror, to face whatever it was that had been pulling them down into this nightmare. And now here he was, standing in a place that was neither here nor there, where time and space no longer seemed to matter. The void stretched endlessly, a black sea that reflected nothing, a place where light had no dominion. But the voice, his voice, kept echoing in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. "Welcome to the other side, Adrian." It was the mirror's voice, wasn't it? That distorted, hollow echo of his own. He didn't know if it was real or just a figment of his imagination, but it sounded so close, so alive. He had to break free. There had to be a way out. There had to be a way to reverse what had been done. And then, in the distance, something shifted. A figure emerged from the darkness, moving slowly toward him. It was impossible to make out at first, just a shadow, a blur, but as it grew closer the shape became more distinct. Adrian's breath caught in his throat. It was himself, his own reflection, twisted and deformed. His eyes were black voids, hollow and empty, his skin stretched too tight over his bones. His mouth hung open in a silent scream, his features pulled into a grotesque mockery of the man Adrian had once been. "You," Adrian whispered, his voice trembling. "What are you?" The reflection didn't speak, but it didn't need to. Its presence was enough to send a chill down Adrian's spine, a suffocating weight that pressed in on him. The reflection was him, but not. It was what he could have become, if he had given in to the darkness, to the mirror's pull. It was the nightmare version of himself, the one that had been forged in the mirror's endless depths. The figure reached out a hand, its fingers long and twisted, and Adrian stumbled backward, his heart hammering in his chest. He could feel the coldness of its touch, even though it was still a few feet away, as if the very air around it had been infected by the darkness. "No," Adrian whispered, shaking his head. "I won't become you. I won't." But the reflection didn't speak. It simply smiled, if it could be called a smile, its lips curling into a twisted grin, revealing teeth that were sharp and jagged. The grin spread wider, wider still, until it was impossible to look at without feeling the bile rise in his throat. Adrian took a step back, but the reflection followed, its movements eerily synchronized with his own. Every time he moved, it mirrored him. Every time he stumbled, it stumbled. But the reflection's smile never faltered. It was taunting him. It was mocking him. It was everything he had feared, and everything he had become. He reached into his pocket, his fingers trembling, and pulled out the small shard of stone he had taken from the tomb earlier, the one Mark had found when they first opened the door to the tomb. It was the only thing that had been untouched by the mirror's influence. Perhaps it was the key. Perhaps, if he could destroy the reflection, he could escape. With shaking hands, Adrian raised the shard. He could feel the pulse of power from the mirror, its energy, its malevolence, radiating around him. The reflection stepped closer, its black eyes fixed on him, and Adrian saw in them the endless abyss of his own despair. The mirror was inside him now. It had claimed him. But he wouldn't let it win. Not yet. He lunged forward, the shard held high, and thrust it toward the reflection. A blinding light exploded from the point of contact, and for a brief, fleeting moment, Adrian thought he saw a glimmer of hope, a way out, a path to freedom. But as quickly as the light had come, it faded, leaving him standing alone in the dark. The reflection had vanished. The void around him seemed to contract, the air thick with the scent of decay and the lingering whispers of lost souls. And yet, somehow, Adrian felt lighter. He felt as if the weight that had been crushing him was beginning to lift, ever so slightly. The mirror's hold on him was weakening. He could feel it, distant, fading, like the last remnants of a nightmare slipping away from his mind. But then a voice, familiar, haunting, broke through the silence. "It's not over, Adrian." The voice was soft, gentle, yet filled with a quiet certainty. It was Helen's voice. Adrian turned, and for a moment he thought he saw her, a shadow in the darkness, her face blurred by the dim light. She stepped forward, her expression serene, almost peaceful. "No," Adrian whispered, shaking his head. "You're not real. You're gone." Helen smiled, the same twisted smile from the reflection, her eyes dark and hollow. "I'm as real as you want me to be," she said softly, her voice a sweet, tragic lullaby. "You can still join us. You can still be free." Adrian stepped back, his mind reeling. The mirror was still inside him, still whispering, still pulling at him. But he knew something now. He knew that the only way out was to face it. To destroy the reflection, to confront the truth of what had happened. The mirror had already taken so much from him. His friends, his sanity, his soul. But it wouldn't take everything. With one final desperate cry, Adrian turned and ran into the void, away from the whispering darkness, away from the reflection of the man he could have become. And as he ran, the darkness began to fade, the voices quieting, the mirror's influence weakening. The emptiness stretched on before him, endless and silent, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he could breathe. He didn't know if he would ever truly escape. He didn't know if he would ever find peace. But one thing was certain. The mirror had no power over him anymore. This is not a true story.